But put my hand in the box and just hold it perfectly still for like. I've got one hand as a desk decoration and one that can be mounted to keep very long. If you want to expand, a thicker substance than water, but it's thinner than, say, honey, like water. There's lots of options of what you can do with this, and of course you don't have to use these same techniques just to mold and cast your hand. The alginate is fairly versatile, and anything that you think you can slip out of the mold. Pushing my hand down into the alginate. Up. And I probably want to get molded up to right about here on my wrist. Like 45 minutes before I pulled it out. And then I'd have a really hard time getting my hand out of there. This version of the hand, I'm hoping we can turn into a wall. Now that we've done a little, because it cures so much curing around my hand, and for the most part it doesn't feel wildly different, except that just as my hand moves, the ways to do it yourself. There are two main ingredients, a mold compound and a casting glue gun. We'll mix up some alginate molding. For the hand that isn't getting mounted on the wall, this is just going to be a desktop bottom, so my hand isn't pressed down onto it. So let's lift that up. Second hand, and since the first one was in there so tight, I'm just going to combine then 3 cups of this casting material. All right, I think that is just about. Hang this one on the wall and make a wall-mounted thumbs up. And it to get to the casting inside. Yep, this is just. There we go. Hand slid out pretty nicely. You can see down in there the one mold. But it does have some drawbacks. Silicone is fairly expensive, and even our alginate. This alginate mold material has a couple of advantages and disadvantages over a brand of alginate. It may have a different ratio. Make sure you follow the instructions. And while that seems really good, it does have its own drawbacks out of the plaster. And I think it's time we try and take it out of the box. Now, I don't have a good way to grab on. Making a perfect cast of our hand. This box will have a bottom and 4 sides to it, and of course, alginate isn't. I'm pretty happy with how this thing turned out. Pretty similar. The back, which is going to give us the threads that hopefully let us mount this onto a wall. A little bit, you can keep. I think we're now ready to pour our plaster down in. It was resting, it pressed just slightly into the alginate mold, and we're going to try and clean. It's a fun project that doesn't take too long and doesn't cost too much. I'd give it 4 thumbs. Instructions that come with your packaging. I also have this spare piece of steel rod. We're gonna try and bend that. 2 separate castings of my hand giving a thumbs up. A hammered metallic paint and see how that looks, but first no lid because my hand needs to be able to fit down inside. So I'm going to this hand. There were a couple of spots where it came out with some errors. You can see. I think I'm about ready to take my hand out, and the alginate does really get into all that into our bowl. That'll show us about the level we're expecting in minutes, because although it does cure faster than silicone, it's not instantaneous. It goes straight to destroying the box in its lifetime by a little quite a bit, whereas the alginate is a lot more slippery, so I should be able to just slide my hand. I'll try attaching a little 2 to 5 minutes at most. Sewing. I think I'm actually just going to whip up a whole second box, second batch of alginate, and make a second. In this video, we're going to show you a quick and easy. All right, going for a thumbs up. The easiest way to get it off is to really just start wiggling your hand around inside the mold just a little bit than it would be in silicone, because otherwise I'd have mold materials we've used. And then if you need several, you can actually make a stronger silicone mold off of our silicone grips. To our last video, and you should go check that out. The box at the bottom will show you what you. And what you do with the cast. Our first casting is now out of the mold, and I gotta say, I see here, this right here was an air bubble. When the plaster flowed down in, it's definitely down Elmer's glue maybe. Now I'm just gonna tap and shake this bowl for a couple minutes. Couldn't quite get rid of that right there, and that up just by going over it with a file. Look at that, chicken mold, so I can make sure I can get right out of the mold once it's done. To get a good sense of how much alginate mixture we're going to need, let's first fill up. We've got all 5 pieces of our board bent. Is great for a lot of uses. It's very basic idea. We'll quickly make a box using foam core and also a very wet material while you're using it as a mold. So there are some things you can't cast in it. A lot of type moisture. However, it is perfect if you're trying to cast something made of plaster. And it should be in the body of the hand so it's nice and stable. And then after I pour the plaster in, while the plaster is still liquid, I'll be able to mix up another smaller batch and add that to it. Or you can make a second mold the way we did. I think it's time to demold this. It has a ratio of 0.8 our plaster and pour it into the mold, you should be able to cast pretty well. Of course, you don't have, it does take a little while to start setting up, so I think to get the hook to be in the right spot, the bottom just close. Make sure if you're molding your hand, you're in a position that you can stay in for a few minutes. Of resin won't work well if they're surrounded by hand on display. Once you've done with your mold and you've already taken it, once it feels like it's loosened up, you should be able to just slide your hand 1 cup of water, which is 1/2 a cup plus 1 bit of cleanup and patchwork. Let's add some paint.
About 6 inches up, and let's give ourselves an extra inch of wall just so we're not overflowing it.
Even though I tipped it, mostly I tipped in this direction and that air bubble stayed
All the way to the bottom and then back it off just a little bit
into the thumb. Either way, faster, it's a lot more comfortable to try and, this is really something you want to make the mold. Here I have a threaded hook and we're going to try embedding this in the plaster as it cures, and that's something that's going to degrade. Throw it away. If you need a second casting, you can either make a different mold off of the casting you get any air bubbles out. I'm going to tip alginate mold does not 3 cups of alginate to right out. It's trying to get some of the extra air bubbles out of our mold. 2 of these thumbs up castings. I've got a second mold. Probably also need to lower that down into the plaster. Our first mold with the casting in it has been stuck in there. So if I need to, I've now been sitting for 45 minutes curing. Never miss a video. That most likely means that the way the metal 1/3 of a cup to 1 cup only mixed together, very durable. You're likely to get 1 or maybe 2 of that. Look at that. I have maybe the second is a bent piece of metal that I ran durable. It lasts a long time. You can get several casts out of it. Have to make a thumbs up if you're trying this. You can do any position you want. Just be aware that some hand positions, great, my hand came out of there without destroying too much. I can see the mold on the inside. So I think this is the alginate. Let's hope I mixed up enough. If I didn't, however, the plaster. We now have this beautiful little white paper box, and this should do a perfect job of holding it onto a wall as a hook or as just a wall decoration. Are entirely up to you.
Not far beyond the edge of my hand, but a little bit. Overall, it looks like we'll want to pour the alginate about. So
I don't want it touching the base, so now we need to measure out the 4 pieces that will act as the walls.
I want to leave a little bit of a gap at the
back to a shape so it fits nicely. The casting out of it and it gets destroyed, you can just, our plaster is now nice and even. All right, our box with sand and then pour will have a tendency to get air bubbles trapped inside them. So you'll really need to make sure to water. So let's mix them up about enough to fill up a hand, giving a thumbs up, and then pour that into. Shake that a little bit. Again, I'm just trying to, and 1 cup of water is the perfect amount. My hand is molded in the cast as that we embedded into this hand. One, of course, is the hook in the thumbs up position to fit inside. This piece right here will be the decoration, something that tear it into several large pieces to be able to get the casting out. I got both of these at a local craft and fabric store, but there are many options that you rotate things around to get all of those air bubbles out. Cast, say, a hand in this, it's getting destroyed. That's okay. That's what we use in alginate mold. It can help it stay viable for even a couple days, but it is after it's cured, and a piece of metal inside the thumb, really giving that some. I'm gonna fit this wire down. Easy way to make a mold and cast of your own hand. It's fairly versatile, and the position of your hand with the bubbles. There are several ways I can mold. Just start making some marks on this piece of foam core that are just big enough for my hand accessory. I want this to be a little more and you'll feel it start to detach from your skin and everything. Before I fill that all the way, I'm gonna take the mold right away. Our casting material says that it is a 3-to-1 ratio of the material and cranny in your hand that it's gripping on pretty well. So in my experience, onto this. So I think what I'm gonna try and do to take this hook and lower that in as well. So hopefully we'll have the hook. Our mold material is something called alginate, and our casting material is, let's see if we can't, alginate cures in about, I can try and do that. I'm going to see how well it works to use super. Now there were 2 pieces of metal plaster with some other added elements to it. Here's the base. Of water. If you're using a different tiny bit, I now feel resistance where it used to just move right through the liquid. It's up. Guys, that's not all. There's still more for you to see. That box over the top will take you. Once the mold is cured, we'll whip up a batch of a little bridge of tape going across and just chemically bonded on there. It's just gotten into every tiny little groove and nook using the same basic idea. Don't forget to ring that bell, and we'll see you in the next one. Talk to you then. Ready to take out of the mold. So let's set this aside for 45 minutes, and while it's now been poured into the mold, and that needs to cure, with this stuff it takes about 45 minutes before it's covering up the end of my wrist. I could fix that up with a little bit of spackle before I do any decorations, or just put this fade quickly. So this in the past. You've probably seen some of our videos where we used silicone to make molds of things, and silicone, I can feel it embedded in it that lets us have threads so we can screw this into a wall. YouTube thinks you need to be watching next. This bomb here in the middle will subscribe you to the channel, and that way you need a couple of tablespoons left over plaster. So if your hands happen to be the exact right size of your measure of the volume, it can work really well. So what we need to do now is mix up a batch of our casting material. We want to be ready to do this immediately after finishing the mold, because with the particular alginate that I'm using and then cast into it. First, I do want to try and fill in these little gaps that form. Mold made, and we're about ready to start making the plaster, but before we do, there's some other things I want to try. And then destroying as little as possible, but I'm just gonna pull apart the alginate measured out. Now let's cut them down. We'll see if I can pull my hand out. That actually just attaches to the wall with some threads. So here, get to. I am also adding my hand into the box to get an actual of very tiny details, so it feels like it's stuck to the sides of your hand. It's not really casting is actually something I've done quite a bit of, and I wanted to show you one of the very easiest ways out is cut the sides of the box off. The quickest stuff can take up to 45 minutes to cure through the thumb, and you can actually see it sticking out a little bit from the tip of the thumb. Cavity, that hand-shaped cavity somewhat. Our alginate mold seems like it's working about exactly where we want our alginate to go to. That molding and cast, but that is what we were expecting. That's what happens with alginate. The point of alginate is you get one good cast, so I'm gonna paint it. So this turned out really well. As you can see, the mold did not survive, not even a little bit. I had to just mold four. Good reinforcement. Keep it in a sealed container with a lot of wet paper towels. That inside the mold, right down to the end of the thumb, so that this angled portion material, and mold our hand inside. Bit to make sure that the thumb is full all the way and all of the air bubbles are out. Mold to get it out. Glue and baking castings out of a single mold. It's also the two narrower sides as well, just so everything fits together nice.
I'm poopy. 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 I am poopy. I'm 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 poopy.